Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. These days, it's rarely a case of if you'll be hacked and more of a question of when. Once the attacker has passed your defenses, they cover their tracks and systematically infiltrate your network to steal information or shut your business down. You need to rethink the way security is delivered for your digitally transformed business, and there's one security solution that delivers it all: NetScout. Get visibility without borders for consistent detection, mitigation, and prevention across any network, data center, cloud, 5G, and more. Learn more at securityweekly.com/NetScout. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Are you trying to make a big splash at Black Hat this year? That's awesome, because we'll be recording Paul's Security Weekly from our suite at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, and we still have a couple of sponsored interviews left. So grab them before they're gone by submitting your request to securityweekly.com/booking. Security Weekly will also be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta, Georgia, October 10th through the 11th. EC Council is offering our listeners a $100 off discount to attend the two-day conference. You can use the discount code HH19SW when you register, or go to securityweekly.com/Hacker Halted. Alrighty. Let's see. Michael Aiello is here with us today for this interview. He is the Director of Product Management for Google Cloud Security. Additionally, he serves as a board director or board advisor to cybersecurity technology and investment companies. Previously, he was the Chief Information Security Officer at Goldman Sachs. Michael, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Nice to have you. This is really awesome because we haven't really talked much about Google Cloud or the security offering, so this is a great opportunity.
Yeah, Michael was at Global Cyber Innovation Summit back in May in Baltimore. We met in person, and you were on a panel there talking about the shared responsibility model in the cloud. And we've had a lot of questions about cloud security and what things do I need, what things do the cloud providers provide, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, Michael, we got to get you on and have this conversation around who's doing what, who's responsible for what in the cloud when I move to cloud. So, that's the conversation I want to have, understand what Google Cloud's doing. You've made some interesting announcements with Chronicle kind of rolling into the Google Cloud portion of the business. Paul and John and I are big fans of Chronicle. So I think this will be a great discussion.
Fantastic. I'm happy to start wherever you'd like. We can go to shared responsibility model and give you a couple thoughts there if that's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point, because when you think about cloud, I think of cloud in three different kind of flavors. Maybe there's more. You've got infrastructure as a service. I'm spinning up instances in my cloud environment. I could be leveraging a platform as a service where you're doing a lot more management of the underlying infrastructure because it's part of this platform. Then you have full-blown software as a service, right? Those are kind of maybe the core three that everybody thinks about. I see some variations sometimes with things like container as a service. Is it a platform? Isn't it a platform, et cetera? So I think it would be great to start kind of across those areas and start thinking about, what do the cloud providers do, and what is the responsibility of me in those different environments?
Great. So at the highest level, I want to quickly address a thought that sometimes I get asked that frames up how we talk about the shared responsibility model, and I'll frame it with an example. If you're running PHP 5 and MySQL on-prem, it's not safe. If you're running it on-prem in a virtual machine, it's not safe. And if you're running it in a virtual machine in the cloud, it's not safe. So simply moving things to the cloud doesn't magically address lots of security concerns. And folks, I'm sure folks listening to this know that, but sometimes it's an interesting starting point for folks. And that brings us to the shared responsibility model. So what actually are customers of clouds and cloud services responsible for, and what's the cloud service provider responsible for? So in the three categories that you described, cloud service providers, from an infrastructure perspective, are generally responsible and claim responsibility, and sometimes put this in warranties and guarantees about their platform around the hardware. And we'll spend a minute on hardware, the network stack, the data storage layer, the general infrastructure that goes between there, and the hypervisor for infrastructure as a service. So that's the first piece. And then as a customer, you're responsible for the operating system, the kernel in some cases that runs on it, all the way up through the application layer, and pick where you end the OSI stack on that piece of it. So that's infrastructure as a service. In the other two, you kind of just, depending on what service you're consuming, you pick another layer above the hypervisor that the customer assumes responsibility for. So going all the way to the end, if you're consuming an API that provides weather data, right? It's no one in their right mind would think that as a customer of that, you're responsible for the security of the data center providing that API. If you're consuming Salesforce, or you're consuming a software as a service solution, no one in their right mind would think that you're responsible for some piece of this. So that's at the highest level how we think about the shared responsibility, and that's kind of the story in a pure, you've chosen, you're going to go with one cloud or two clouds, and all of your workloads are running on the cloud. And the only thing you need to think about is, what am I responsible for now that I'm running in the cloud? But I can't imagine there's many organizations today that are only running in the cloud. There's a few, but most organizations and most enterprises are running hybrid. Maybe they're experimenting with a few things in the cloud. Maybe they've got a bunch of production workloads in the cloud, but for security, compliance, regulatory reasons, they've got workloads on-prem. So the reality is they're likely running things on-prem and in cloud. And they're likely running VMs and containers on-prem. Maybe they got an orchestration layer like Kubernetes on-prem, and they're deploying things on-prem and in multiple clouds. The shared responsibility model changes quite a bit there. If you think about what we talked about before, where the cloud provider's responsible from 0 to some layer N in the stack, and then the customer's responsible for layer N to the top of the stack. In a hybrid environment, the enterprise customer may be responsible for layer 0 to the orchestration layer, and then the cloud provider, or a managed cloud provider, will provide responsibility from the orchestration layer up to the application or the application stack. And then the customer takes responsibility again for networking and authentication and authorization, those things. So we see a world where cloud providers help and operate enterprises both on-prem and in the cloud simultaneously. And depending on what setup works for the customer, you end up with a different type of responsibility. Now, from a customer perspective, from an owner perspective, if you're a system administrator, if you're a DevOps lead, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to set up a little Kubernetes cluster on my side, and I'm going to run in cloud. What we're quickly, as customers think more about this and run more production workloads, they realize they become responsible for the whole stack, and they have to have expertise in the whole stack, and they're not actually getting huge benefits from the shared responsibility model. So, for example, if you're running on-prem and you're running your own Kubernetes cluster, or you're running your own OpenStack, or pick your orchestration layer environment, and you've got containers running in the cloud or VMs running in the cloud. On-prem, you have to run a data center. You have to run physical access to the data center. You got to run your network. You got to run all these things, and the security of all those items. And then in the orchestration layer, you're responsible. And then in the cloud, you don't have that responsibility, but you are responsible for the application and things running on top of it. So very quickly, depending on how you mix and match these items, which you may do for security reasons, you end up with more responsibility for the things that you are most trying to protect. And it's likely that cloud providers who are able to specialize in security may be doing a better job at some of these aspects. And I can talk through, I think, some things about Google where we think we're doing a good job, and it may make sense to bring the shared responsibility model and trust us with some of those security aspects.
Yeah.
So I'll stop if any of that makes sense.
No,
Well,
yeah,
it
and I
makes
was just
perfect
thinking,
sense.
like, how do you balance the control versus complexity, right? Because when let's take the two extremes. If we own everything ourselves, we have the ultimate amount of control, but we have a huge amount of complexity, right? And the other end of that spectrum is I put everything up in the cloud, and maybe it's a SaaS offering, but I have very little control, but I've got maybe a lot less complexity because there's not as many bells and whistles and knobs and switches to turn, right?
Absolutely. So you can imagine that balance as an efficient frontier, right? You want to have maximum control with minimum complexity at all times.
Mhm.
And any solution you compose, for which you could get more control with the same amount of complexity, or less complexity for the same amount of control, would be an inefficient solution. So as the product lead, so we help work with customers to design products and solutions so that they can run safely and securely on our cloud. We try to hit effectively that efficient frontier between those things. So that's at a high level, but tangibly, what does that mean? One of the things customers care a lot about is their keys. So their encryption keys. Are the keys stored on-prem? Are they on-prem in a hardware security module? Are we trusting the cloud provider to hold our keys? Is the cloud provider holding them on disk? Is the cloud provider holding them in a hardware security module that the cloud provider's procured? Or is the cloud provider storing them in protected Intel, SGX, AMD, SEV type secure enclaves, right? There's a whole range of ways, and people care, and enterprises care a lot about this. So from a balancing complexity versus control perspective, giving customers the ability to say, at Google, you don't even have to think about keys if you don't want to, because all of the data that you give to Google is encrypted at rest by default. So that's something our platform does that massively simplifies a lot of environments for customers. So if they don't want to have to think about encryption and they want to tell their regulators and compliance folks that the data is encrypted, you say, yep, our data is absolutely encrypted, and you get that on Google Cloud. Now, that may not be the level of control that you want over your data or your encryption keys. In fact, maybe you want to protect against other concerns that you would have about how Google's operating its environment, and you'd like your keys stored in a hardware security module. Great. You introduce much more complexity in certain dimensions, depending on how your capability with this, but you get more control. Now you're controlling access to that through a hardware security module or a hardware security module company that you've built trust in, and now there's a third party in the trust arrangement between you and the cloud provider. So we try to offer solutions that are on that efficient frontier between those two dimensions and guide customers away from kind of really gnarly setups that don't get you towards a real tangible benefit.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, you have to choose the right strategy for what your goals are, right? And
Yes.
focus on that's the hard part about security, is knowing where to focus, essentially.
And I think a lot of the questions listeners have is they're like, how much should I do with the cloud provider and give up control?
Yeah. How much should I do on my own?
How much should I do on my own, which adds complexity?
Go to a third party.
Right.
And bring a different solution outside of the cloud provider, right?
Right, exactly. And in our audience, they've asked this question, and it's on me because I think John assigned it to me last week when we were doing the show, was, help guide us on, okay, what things can I use right from the cloud providers based on these different models? And then what are the types of solutions I really need to look at to add additional layers of security myself based on these different environments? And that's not an easy question. And you've given us a couple scenarios where, oh yeah, it gets really complex when you think about Kubernetes and containerization and DevOps and where those environments run and where those different layers are in the stack. And this is a big challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, and so the way we think about our job as a cloud service provider is in three buckets from a security perspective. We think about security of the cloud, and that means explicitly security of the physical location where our infrastructure is running up to the hypervisor or if you're going further with the other services a little bit further, are part of the shared responsibility model as a cloud service provider. That's part one. Part two is security in the cloud. So my team runs 46 products that customers use to security products that customers use to compose their applications and services. Encryption, identity and access management, monitoring, half the RSA floor. We've built products or we've brought partners in that allow customers to compose security solutions. And then we have security services. So we have offerings around data loss prevention, around reCAPTCHA. So you may have encountered reCAPTCHA on the web. That's a cloud solution that we offer. Around our threat intelligence data that Google's been gathering for many, many years, that we think is very unique and helps lots of customers when they bring us their logs. And we've got 5 or 6 of these security services that help you in your business, whether or not you're a customer of Google Cloud. So those are the 3 buckets. If you think about the complexity of managing infrastructure at a level that resists very significant, sophisticated attackers, that's a challenge, because you have to think very hard about that full attack surface, and it's something we've done at depth here at Google. So one example of this is manufacturing the components that go into a motherboard and go into the components that assemble a compute unit and a network card. So these are kind of the basic components of a modern server computer. Google manufactures these, and we worry quite a bit about things going into our supply chain. We do not trust our supply chain, even when we're manufacturing it ourselves, if we're using a contract manufacturer or something like this. So we've decided the appropriate thing to do would be to build a chip. We call it the Titan chip, which we embed in our motherboards and most of our network cards, which has a signature on it that we've burned in. And when the machine boots up, it matches a signature on the firmware, which then we use that signature to sign up to the next level, up to the BIOS, the kernel operating system, all the way up to the hypervisor that's running on the machine. So if you are concerned about physical hardware security, and that's an attack surface you actually care about, there's lots of solutions to that problem. We're not saying this solution is the pristine solution, but it's one we've arrived at that seems robust. And as a customer, we'll tell you about that. We'll write it down. We'll put it in the contract that we do this thing, and you don't have to worry about that anymore. So if you think about what you want to be good at as a business, like if you're a sports retailer, maybe physical hardware integrity is not a specialization that you need to invest in for your business. Maybe it actually makes sense to contract that out to a cloud provider. And that's kind of how we think about the shared responsibility model and where we guide customers to be good at where they want to be good at security and where they want to do it themselves, where they want to bring in a specialized vendor, and where they want to rely on the cloud provider.
Yeah,
I can give more examples of where things have gone the other way, or however you guys want to take that.
Well, I like the hardware security example.
I like it. That's a great example, because when you think about the physical aspects of the hardware, you've got it covered. Great. Check. Right. I don't have to worry about
when
that.
I buy hardware and I like to save costs, it literally comes on the slow boat from China. That's not the best scenario.
Right. Paul likes the freshest Chinese malware embedded in his hardware that he can get.
Tastes best
but
when
not
it's fresh.
Everybody likes that scenario.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Now, you talk about the products then. So I want to talk a little bit about products, because I'm seeing this very interesting trend, Michael. You and the other cloud providers adding more security products in the portfolio that people can leverage to really simplify, I think, some of that complexity of going to the cloud and using different solutions. And I see this as, to me, this is nirvana for some organizations that don't have the security staff to run or buy their own tools, et cetera, et cetera. So can you give us, you said 46 products, you gave us a few. Can you give us some examples of some of the different offerings that Google Cloud offers that people can just leverage? Because my guess is, from a cost perspective, a management perspective, they're a lot easier than rolling your own.
Sure, happy to do so. Maybe one of the easiest ones to consume is our shielded VMs. So we've gone through some pretty significant effort on our team to build special security controls and capabilities into the stack that runs a lot of common VM infrastructure. And that's tied to our hardware. It's tied to how these machines configure themselves. They self-validate, self-set up. If they suddenly have something strange happen to them or the base image changes, they shut off. And these are literally all you have to do is go to the VM chooser and pick a shielded VM from a drop-down box, and you get all of these security capabilities in your VM without doing anything. It's a very fast-growing product for us because we wanted to basically make it kind of silly to not pick the secure option and get all of these security capabilities. Now, obviously, there's a few very nuanced compute workloads where there's a little bit of a performance impact, but it's not meaningful for the vast majority of cases where you wouldn't want to pick one of these because you're making that trade-off. But that's probably the easiest one. It's a very, very fast-growing product for us, and we have a white paper on how it all works and why it's awesome. Another thing that's really exciting about being here at Google that we feel special to be able to take part in is Google's been investing in internal security products for years and years and years, and we've got a whole cache of awesome stuff internally that we use that we haven't externalized and brought through GCP. But part of my team's job is commercializing many of these internal assets that have been built over long periods of time, and we've got more coming. One of the great stories here is our data loss prevention tool. So you can imagine Google cares a lot about where sensitive data exists, and we want to make sure we treat it well and don't lose it and do all the right things with sensitive data. So we built some really sophisticated machine learning based data loss prevention products. And we have an internal system that scans huge amounts of data internally to make sure it's meeting all of our control and security objectives. And about 2 years ago, we commercialized this in a product called the Data Loss Prevention API. And with that product, all you have to do is you send it text, audio, or images, and a parameter describing what kind of sensitive information you either want to discover or automatically redact, and it will do that. So a good example of this is you send it a picture and turn on face detection, and it will automatically return you back a picture with a bounding box around the face so you can remove the face if you'd like out of your picture. Additionally, you can say, I want to discover sensitive information in text. So we have customers that send us screen grabs that they've recorded from sharing sessions that they're doing with customers to automatically redact and remove social security numbers, customer names, customer email addresses, so that they can run analytics and do further training with it.
We could send them every audio file from our podcast and remove the word PCI.
Oh, we could. Jeff wouldn't like that, but yeah, that would be great.
Totally. It's so that's kind of like layer one. It's like, yep, okay, do things to do detectors on common things that are PII, but we've taken it actually much further. We've defined, I actually don't know the number, Scott, a guy on my team knows the number, but it's like 100 different categories of detection. So like the social security equivalent in Singapore, we need to know that. So that's in there. So it's a very sophisticated mechanism, and it's contextually aware in a way that we've had to refine here at Google for many years. So we need to know whether it is a test credit card number that is used for testing or a real credit card number. So it performs the checksum on it when it thinks it's a credit card number, and it'll do that differentiation. So imagine going full extreme in a sensitive data detector for years and years and years. I get to take that and turn it into a commercial product.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's really cool.
Is Chronicle, so with the announcement for Chronicle, is Chronicle part of the product set or is it part of the services component? Where does Chronicle fit now in the GCP stack?
Sure. So we're it's kind of business as usual for us. We've Chronicle has two components. One component is VirusTotal, which we're very proud as a community leader to be part of. And then they have a threat investigation incident response product. We've got comparable, similar products that we're building in Google Cloud platform that and we're figuring out the best way to bring these things together to provide the best offering for our customers that we can.
That's awesome. Paul, any additional questions? Michael, this has been great. I think this has helped people really get a handle on what's the cloud provider responsible for, what offerings are available, at least in Google Cloud. I think this has been great.
Absolutely, I agree. And Michael, I wish we had more time to explore more things, so we'll just have to have you back.
Great, happy to answer any more questions you've got at any time, and really appreciate the opportunity to share more about what we're up to here in Google Cloud. Thank you.
Fantastic, Michael. Thank you so much. With that will conclude this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time.